Thanks for coming, everyone. So today's event is part 3 of this year's ASA Early Career Researcher chapter online series. And today's event is how to transition to industry, advice from astronomers in industry. So it's going to be a great session today. And just as a reminder that this session is being recorded. So my name is Henry. I'm a postdoc at ANU, and I'm the hosting this meeting today. And we also have Anshu Gupta, who is helping to moderate today's session. So if you have any questions or comments at any time, feel free to send us a DM in the Zoom chat. So before we start, I'd just like to give a brief acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the ASA ECR chapter acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. I'm talking to you today from Canberra, which is on the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I'd also like to remind everyone that today's event is covered by the ASA's Code of Conduct. So the ASA is committed to making ASA organised, sponsored or supported meetings, events and publications inclusive, productive and enjoyable for everyone, regardless of age, caring responsibilities, cultural diversity, disability, gender, indigeneity, sexual orientation, gender identity, physical appearance, or religion. So today's schedule, so the event will run for 1.5 hours in total. The first 50 minutes will be presentations from each of our panelists about their career trajectories, how they got to where they are now, etc. And the last half an hour will be an audience Q&A. So we'll hold all questions from the audience until we've got through all of the presentations. But if you have a question at any time, feel free to pop it in the chat box. And if you want to keep the question anonymous, you can also send a DM to Anshu or I and we can read it out instead. Okay, so today's speaker schedule. So we're starting with Julie and then Dilyar, Jose, Sarah, and then Bonnie. And as a reminder, each of you has 10 minutes and I'll give you a warning when you have 2 minutes left. Julie, take us away.
Hello. I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here to chat to all of you today. And hopefully you do get something out of it. Just a little bit of a spark, something maybe, hopefully. So my name's Julie Banfield, and I grew up in Canada. I did my PhD in Calgary in 2011. Shortly thereafter, I moved to Australia, and I worked for CSIRO Astronomy and Space Science as part of this was a few years ago, part of the early science cases for the Australian Square Kilometre Array Pathfinder. So early days of ASCAP. At the time, it was 6 antennas and then was expanding further and further. I moved here on a 3-year contract, working visa, had 3 kids, got married and a mortgage, and I'm still here. So that's sort of why I'm here, and I'm an Australian citizen now. So my time at CSIRO, I worked on early EMU science and then moved to the ANU and was part of the Center for All-Sky Astrophysics, Center of Excellence, and worked there some more on ASCAP-related science, including Radio Galaxy Zoo, which was a citizen science project, part of the Zooniverse of citizen science projects, and did some machine learning with Data 61. And around 2017, I was just in the process of having my 3rd child, and I just knew it was time to leave academia. I don't know why, I just knew. I woke up one day and said, oh, this is it, I'm done. I have no more desire to put out another application for a job that's going to take me somewhere. Now I'm quite content where I am. I like where I live. We just bought a house, so we just sort of wanted some stability, and which is why I chose to leave. It wasn't anything bad. It was just a decision that we made as a family. And I was lucky enough that I was on maternity leave, so I could look around and see what I could do. And I applied for a position with the Australian Signals Directorate, which I was given a probationary acceptance to make sure that I got a clearance. And at the time, clearances took 2 years to get. And so I called up Dave McConnell, who was part of CSIRO. He's still part of CSIRO, and said, "Hey, do you got some work for me?" Because I was sort of itching to get back in doing things. And he gave me a 3-month position to work on the data processing for the RAC survey. So that was a ASCAP survey once they had all the antennas and dishes running. So just to sort of help with the pipeline. And after that, I joined the public service, went behind the wall of the Australian Signals Directorate. And I was there for about a year, and I left and I joined the Space Systems Division, which is also part of defense. And so that's a fancy way of saying that I got to drive and handle and do things with satellites. And so I was in that for about a year, and then I was like, yeah, this isn't really floating my boat too much. I mean, cool, it's space and it's satellites and stuff, but really not digging it. So I left that and joined Omni. So Omni is a company in Canberra, which is its specialty is providing solutions to government. And so they take me as a data scientist and they put me into various roles around the city/country to help tailor solutions and that for government clients. So that's sort of where I am now. I'm absolutely loving the role that I have because it changes all of the time. So that's something that's really great about where I am, and it provides the stability that I wanted for my family. So that sums up my career, I guess, in a nutshell. And I'm always asked by people, what would you tell yourself when you left academia way back then? If you could do it again, what would you tell yourself? And my number one response is always, don't be afraid to fail. In the sense that when you apply for a job and it's your first job out in industry or away from academia, the chances of you landing that job, unless you're like amazing, is very slim, because the interview process and the CV writing is so different than what you would do in academia. So just go out, apply for jobs, even if you think they're just remotely something that you would want to do, just to get that experience. And when you get your interview and they send you that email that you're always dreading to get saying, sorry, you're really good, but we don't want you, then call them up and ask for feedback. Maybe it was the way you interviewed, or maybe it was something you had on your CV or something along those lines. Just give you that feedback so that you can tailor that experience to land that job that you want. And it might take you 10 goes. I don't know. I think it took me 7 or 8. And that's okay. I was okay, and I was ready to fail. And going in as a data scientist, I also realized that data science is a very competitive field. And so when you're out there, you're competing, like there's a lot of people. And so I always relate it to, if you're an interior designer and you go to do an interview, you always take with you a portfolio. You always take a book, and in that book has photos of things that you've done, projects that you've worked on. You know, maybe you're an artist, you have that same portfolio. But for a data science, what you have is you have that online presence. So you have GitHub and you have Bitbucket and those sort of things. And so you need to get out there and you need to put that information out there so people can see it and create a really good portfolio of your work and what your capabilities are. Because a lot of people go, astronomer, what's that? And you're like, well, it's like physics, but in space. And they're like, oh, physics. Oh, I know physics. So it's very, you sort of have a few hurdles to overcome. And when I left astronomy in 2017, I didn't really have a GitLab or GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket experience. I didn't have anything out there. And then when I joined ASD, again, you couldn't put anything out there. So my data science, I can't talk about my data science work until now. So everything that I do from now onwards, I can talk about. And so I can start to create that portfolio. Whereas before, I just, there's nothing, I don't have anything. So if I was to apply for a job that you guys are applying for in data science, you'd probably, I don't have any of that experience to show. So that's sort of where I suggest heading if you're looking into the data science realm. And just also know that you need to have somebody who's in industry look over some of your stuff, have a practice interview, have them look over your CV, because I know that, you're really excited that you wrote a paper in Nature, and, that's really great. But out in industry, they're like, what's nature? Right? So it's very different. It's the perspective, and you just sort of need somebody to say, it's really great, but just write that you can do technical writing, and you've published X number of papers. So just the little tweaks and little things like that you can add to your CV can really help you get over that hurdle and get that interview and possibly that job.
2 minutes left. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so those are my tips. And if I would go back and do it again, which I wouldn't ever want to, but if I ever did, that would be my tips. And would I ever go back to academia? No, because there are so many awesome, amazing opportunities out there. And once you get your foot in the door in industry, it's like this whole world opens up. And you're like, wow, people have jobs in that. Like, it's fascinating beyond fascinating. And so I wish you all the best of luck, and feel free to reach out if you ever need anything. Happy to read over CVs, as Henry knows, and yeah, help coach you through what you need to coach through. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Julie. That was really helpful. And yeah, seconding how helpful Julie is. When I was doing a bit of an industry job search a couple of years ago, she was so helpful, really helped me with my interviews and everything. So yeah, big thanks. Okay, so now we're moving on to Dilyar. Would you like to take us away?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to talk about my experience, and really looking forward to hear about other people's experience as well. So a little bit of introduction about myself. So I actually finished my PhD not too long ago. I started my PhD in 2016 at Stromlo. I was working with Matthew Collis, working with Sammy and Taipan. So I don't know if Taipan actually commissioned yet. When I joined, it was about to commission. So that says something about joining a survey that hasn't started yet as a PhD student. And then, so inevitably, that PhD took a while, from 2016 to 2021. And during that time, I was part of an organization I'm sure some of you will remember, called Castro. So Castro is predecessor to Astro 3D at the moment. And I would attend these kind of workshops and at conferences. And I remember at the time, Castro was trying to do this kind of a industry placement program for postdocs. And I just went up to, I don't know if you guys know Kate Gunn. She was one of the main player in Castro. I forgot her official title. So I asked her, there's industry placement program for postdoc. Is there anything for PhD students? I just kept bugging her. And eventually, at some point, I wore her.
Yeah, we've lost audio.
So, yeah, where was I? So I just kept bugging Kate Gunn. I said, is there anything for a PhD student? Is there anything for a PhD student? I want to do an internship. And eventually I wore her down. She put me in contact with someone called Philip Williamson. So Philip Williamson, some of you might not know, he is essentially the one started a company that's called IntelliDocs, who actually takes care of all the e-forms you guys do at ANU, for example. So the travel request form you guys do, and that uses IntelliDocs product. So essentially it's a e-form company. And I did an internship with them. So I had an interview with the guy, and he was trying to figure out what I can do. So I told him, I was like, oh, in science, this is what I do, but he was not interested in that. So, and then I used my experience writing data reduction pipeline, which a lot of people don't really bat an eye on in academia. So I said, I write this data reduction pipeline. I wrote myself to my own Python program, and I look at tons and tons of data. Retrospectively, he told me that's actually the thing that got him hooked. And I said, so here's, and he asked me, do you know much about machine learning? I said, well, I've used some of the packages, like sklearn, there's like scikit-learn, those kind of stuff. I've used some of them, and I'm somewhat familiar with it, not an expert. I never was. So he hired me as an AI engineer intern, and essentially asked me to convert PDF forms to e-forms. So it's a basic computer vision problem. Spent 2 months to 3 months doing that. I paused my PhD. I decided to do an internship during my PhD because it felt like being in the middle of a PhD is very much a safety net. If things don't work out, I can come back and finish things off, which is actually what I did because I actually wanted to finish my PhD. Spent 2-3 months doing that and established a really good relationship, still kept in touch with the guy. And towards the end of my PhD, when my scholarship ran out, I needed a job. I needed a part-time job to essentially keep myself from being homeless. So I reached out to him and said, hey, do you have a job that I can take? I'm transitioning out of academia now. And also the decision for me to go out of academia is because, like Julie said, I saw the potential. I saw all the things that I can try out. I was still pretty much doing more or less the same thing programming wise in industry as I was doing in academia, but in a more structured and professional way. It's just the topic was different. And so I went back to him, and then, you know, I set the goals like, okay, I want to be your developer, but not right now, because being a developer, actually, even a junior developer, is going to be very stressful, and I don't have the time or mental energy to do that. So how about I start from bottom up? I'm happy to do that. And because it's not a huge company, that ladder wasn't going to be very high. And then, so I worked for about a year as software support, actually. So every now and then I'll actually get support tickets from ANU saying their travel approval forms were not working, and I had to look into that. Worked for about a year at that position, during which time the guy who owned the company sold it. He sold Intellidox to another company in the UK for about $100 million. And then he started his own angel investing. So for those who don't know what angel investing is, it's essentially these rich people invest in startups. So one day he called me and said, hey, how about we have a meeting? Introduced me to a few people that had pitched some ideas to him and said, okay, I have a guy here who has been working for Microsoft for 30 years, huge expert in IT. Here's this guy who's willing to, you know, really run and to do sales. So I need your machine learning experience and data experience to put together a company. And the problem that we were going to solve was a sharing platform. So for those who can see, it's Rosella Street. So we did this startup. It's kind of like Airbnb for stuff. We established this startup at the end of 2020. Yeah, November 2020. That's also when I essentially went from part-time PhD, part-time work to full-time work, part-time PhD. And at that stage, my thesis was almost pretty much finished. I was just doing final revisions. And then, yeah, so for the last year or so, I've been working in a startup as a technical co-founder. And that experience has been amazing. It's a struggle. It definitely is a struggle, because there are people whose lives definitely rely on us making an impact to actually pay their paychecks. So yeah, so as a technical co-founder in a startup, what that means is that because your partners, your co-founders, you know, some of them might not be technical at all. And also in industry, technical has a very low bar. If you can use something like Visual Studio Code, you're already technical. That's equivalent of us being able to use anything in terminal. So my role was that to build the platform using off-the-shelf product, to do the analytics for it, to measure everything, to build features, to talk to our contractors who are actually also developers themselves, to build essentially this business. And yeah, so it's been pretty great. I got to interview a lot of people as well. So that's a very interesting experience sitting at the other side of interviewing tables. So, you know, I would say my advice to a lot of people leaving academia is that I have been very privileged in a lot of aspects that I can choose. And also it depends on where I am in my life and my responsibilities.
2 minutes left.
Yep. But I would say, you know, think of yourself as a startup. Essentially, the difference that makes is that what kind of skill sets can you pick and essentially lift off from academia, put it in your own pocket and go off and use those skill sets. Your knowledge in astronomy great, fantastic. It helped you a long way. But your programming skills, your writing skills, your communication skills, after seeing a few of your resumes, I'm seeing all those things, but I can still see the language is still very academia centric rather than translating them to industry. So I know that there are a lot of astronomers that possess a lot of great skills, and it's just sometimes it's a little bit almost frustrating to me as a spectator to see that those potentials are not being seen, and they think, oh, what skills do I have? I don't have any experiences. No, you do. You really do have those experiences. You just need to put a different spin on them, put them in a different context, and you guys will be gold. All right, thank you. I think that's my time up.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dilyar. Yeah, some really good advice there to think of yourself in terms of like your brand and your marketable skills and everything. Yeah, thanks. Jose, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jose Martinez. I'm Mexican. I came to Australia in 2005 to do my PhD in astronomy. So whatever I'm going to say, it's absolutely ancient. So my first bit of advice to you, ignore everything I say. Probably you won't miss much because things have changed massively in the last few years, right? Like data science didn't exist when I left academia. So anyway, starting from the beginning, when I finished my PhD, I had a really eclectic, amazing time. I started in dwarf galaxies. I hated it. Then I fell in love with this project that Charlie Lineweaver, the crazy man himself, came up with. I really respect that man a lot. He's just absolutely brilliant. And I learned all of these soft skills that Julie and Dilyar have mentioned, right? Like speaking, talking, being very social, learning, being eclectic is quite a strength. Get out of your comfort zone, where in academia we spend such a long time being highly specialized. So that PhD was already quite eclectic and gave me a bit of freedom to do things differently. And then I was lucky enough to have 2 postdocs, right? And no postdoc was at all like my PhD. So my first postdoc was in NASA, in Kennedy Space Center, where I worked with like absolute things I had no idea, like RNA strands breaking under the UV light when we put them on Martian conditions. We had a simulator that recreated the environment in Mars and the pressures and the temperatures and the UV radiation. So I knew nothing about it. My PhD prepared me in no way for it. Maybe a bit of my IDL and my ability to make graphs helped a bit, but other than that, I had to learn again. Then I came back to Australia and I took a postdoc in CSIRO on bioinformatics. And again, I had to learn everything from scratch. I had to pick up a book that taught me how DNA worked from high school level all the way up. But that's where I started to get a few of the skills that I used into industry when I was told to learn this thing called R, which I hated because I knew C and I knew Fortran and I knew IDL and I knew Perl and I didn't know R. I didn't want to learn R, but I had to, right? So you take it in, you realize it's doable, you realize it's useful, you learn Python, which ironically turned out to be the language of AWS and the language of machine learning and where everything is happening nowadays. So, like, don't be afraid of learning shit and then discard what you don't need and become really good at what you do. Eventually, I left that postdoc, but with that, I took on a little bit of what data science was to become. Data science was not even called data science around 2013. But then these huge opportunities started to come, and trying to get jobs as a newly finished postdoc fellow was pretty hard, because back then there was this conception or misconception about academic people that you are very stiff and you are very good at what you know, but you cannot explain concepts, you cannot convey things, and you cannot even work in a team of non-experts. And a lot of that was awful stereotypical truthness. So it took a lot of effort to break through and to get an opportunity and to get a job. And I think nowadays it's a little bit easier, because now data science has become such a discipline in itself that there are people that are graduating on it as it is. I'm hiring data scientists that come in with PhDs in machine learning or PhDs in data science, and now I hire them, which is quite an irony, because now it's kind of a little bit harder to compete with these kids. But it's been said before, you guys have all these beautiful range of skills that are well above just the ability to write code and commit code into GitHub. So from bioinformatics, from all of these statistics that I did, I somehow landed on Commonwealth Bank for a project where I just wrote models, simple logistic regressions, and where I found most of my success was explaining how they worked rather than coding them, because anyone can code them, really. Eventually, I hated CBA. I think it's an incredible environment to have really brilliant colleagues and a lot of support to just crunch data, but their morals weren't really up to scratch, and the way they treat clients and customers is far from what I thought I wanted to spend time in. So after 6 months, I left them and I landed in Qantas, where I've spent 6 years now, and I am really, really happy in Qantas, and I've gone from being an analyst to a manager to now I'm the senior manager of the data science team in Qantas Loyalty, where again, the biggest strengths that we bring to the table is our ability to be varied, to be heterogeneous, and to be able to communicate what we've learned. So the few advice that I would have for you is, and much like Julie said, do not be afraid to back yourself. Do not be afraid to wing it even. There is a lot of shit that you don't know, but that you are going to pick it up faster than most people. So risk being bold, be comfortable with what you don't know, to literally say, look, I don't know if it's going to work, but this is where my intuition tells us that we should give it a crack. You are probably going to be right more than other people. And if you can face it when you're not right and say, this is what we learned, it's going to be very refreshing. I think that's where I get most impressed when I interview people and when I have young people joining my team. I love it when they just say, why don't we do this? Or I think this is the wrong way. And generally, I get that from people that have PhDs. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, be careful, do back yourself, but do not be arrogant. Do not risk being too stiff. Do not be set on your ways. It's really easy to, without wanting, be dismissive of someone whom you've probably have judged really quickly that they do not understand what they're talking about. You're going to, in academia, you never have an argument with someone who is literally like an ignorant or stupid. You will gonna have fights with people that know really their stuff well. So when you land a point, you will be received. Your point will be taken, right? The way you win disputes in academia is by knowing more, or having solid logic, or having data to back you up. Try to avoid those type of confrontational fights or just miscommunications with people that are either reporting to you or you report to them, because being right is going to not be the important thing. Just focus on conveying. I have 2 more bits of advice. One of them would be, when you want to explain something like a model or like a possible solution to a statistical problem, of course, you're going to go and think, well, they are not an astronomer, they're not a statistician. I'm going to try to reduce this into something that they can understand. And you're going to be very proud of yourself, and you think, oh, I've really simplified it beautifully. I'm going to nail it. My advice to you is, maybe you're halfway there, but you literally are only halfway. You need to dumb it down twice as much what you thought. And I don't mean dumb it down, but I mean, you need to put yourself in the shoes of someone who is not mathematical to really grasp what you're trying to convey. You're going to leave a lot of your value out if you fail to convince a point. If you present something, there's going to be, let's say on a model, right, all the features that you found, all the tests and validations that you did, how you selected the flag, how did you draft the model. That's way too much. Pick one thing and explain it to the end. What are you going to pick? You already know what people want to understand.
2 minutes left.
So that's the one thing. You will, don't worry about simplifying things way too much. You will find out that you rarely do, that you always needed to simplify them further to make yourself understood. And my last advice would be, don't leave academia too quickly. It's very hard to get back because you spending all of your time with elite data scientists, elite astronomers, elite scientists, and when you get left off that bandwagon, it's very hard to come back. You can always leave it. You can leave it for a great opportunity. So only leave it when you're sure. Leave it when there's something amazing, because it's not quite reversible. I do miss it. I'm not saying I would go back to it. I might go back to it when I'm older, but be very careful. It's not a reversible phenomenon. That's it.
Great, thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear what it was like to try and break into data science when it was really in its infancy. And like, as you said, it's like completely different now, like with all these people that have, entire PhDs in data science. Yeah, thanks for that. Sarah, you're up next.
Thanks, Henry. So I'm just going to share my screen here and hopefully you guys will see my slides come up in just a moment. I might be the only person with slides, I'm not sure, but it is that time of the afternoon. So hopefully it kind of breaks everyone out of, that afternoon slump and keeps you interested. So it's really great to be here talking to all of you guys today about my experience of leaving astronomy and moving over into industry. So just as an overview, this has been my career path. So I finished up my PhD at the beginning of 2016. So I've been out of astronomy for almost 6 years, come the middle of this year. So that's just kind of generally the career path that I've taken. I've now held 3 consecutive positions at the Powerhouse Museum. And I guess my career path is quite different from everybody else speaking today in that I've gone down much more of a science communication route rather than sort of data science and that kind of work. So it all kind of begins with my PhD, which I did at the University of Sydney. If anyone is interested, I was studying H1 absorption and emission in nearby galaxies using the compact array. That's me on one of my early observing runs there, but in preparation for the ASCAP flash absorption line survey, which is kind of really only truly getting underway right now. So I was a ways out from that actual project. I was doing lots of things in parallel to that, and I expect that this will resonate with most of the students out there in the audience. So I did a lot of tutoring, a lot of casual tutoring, lab demonstrating, exam marking. I was really lucky to get quite a competitive position as a postgraduate teaching fellow, which was basically doing 1 day a week of kind of more involved teaching activities for the first 2 years of my PhD. And then towards the end, I also coordinated the viewing nights for our first year introduction to astronomy course, which was something that I really and truly loved doing. Also at the same time, so another plug for Castro there, I was actually a co-supervised ATNF, UCID and Castro student, so I had supervisors in all 3 organizations. And that gave me some fantastic opportunities to test the waters for outreach. In fact, it was really my first experience of doing any science communication or public outreach. And that included giving talks to school students about the solar system and how seasons and phases of the moon occur. It also included a 2-week stint as Uluru astronomer in residence, which I can't speak highly enough of. That was a phenomenal experience, basically talking to people about the work that Castro did and answering their thorny astrophysical questions. The last thing that I was kind of doing in parallel to all of this was working as a guide at Sydney Observatory. So I started that midway through my PhD, and it was really there. I was kind of halfway through. I was getting the feeling that I didn't really want to stay in academia. It was so competitive, and I was really concerned about the requirement to continually move around the world. I had a partner, still do, who's also an astronomer. So he's remained in the field, but I just couldn't see how we were going to make it work with, taking jobs all over the world and trying to stay together. And the observatory really gave me, I think, that experience of doing a ton of science communication, leading the night tours there every night, telescope viewings, talking to people about my research, but to a general audience, all kinds of things like that. And in strong contrast to the other speakers, I was really, really lucky here because it was also the observatory that gave me a direct route into the industry jobs that I've held ever since. So the observatory is actually part of the same overarching museum as the powerhouse. We have another site in Castle Hill called the Museum's Discovery Centre. And from 2025, we will have a fourth site in addition to the others out at Parramatta. So I'll go through the rest of my career path at the end, but I thought that more interesting was really to spend most of my remaining time talking about what it is a science curator actually does and how my experience prior to that kind of applies to my job now. So we have a collection of 500,000 objects. They span everything from science and technology to architecture and the built environment, arts, fashion, design, kind of you name it, we house it. It's an incredibly vast and interesting collection, dates back to the 1880s. And includes, amongst other things, a phenomenal astronomy and space collection. So a big part of my job is researching that historical collection, writing about the objects in the collection for our website so that information can be shared with the public. Another part of my work is developing that collection, so bringing new objects into the collection. And this is where I think my astronomy experience really comes into play, because I'm directly using what I learned there about astronomy and related fields like space science to understand like what's at the forefront right now, what are the new discoveries, what's really exciting, and then most importantly, how can we represent that in the form of this physical object, usually in the collection. So there's a couple of kind of key space objects there, including Australia's first ever payload to the Australian Space Station at the top right that I acquired in 2016. And then a couple of years ago, I'm sure you guys will recognize the MWA antennas. So we brought 4 of those into the collection, plus 2 more that we can use for demonstrations. And that was so exciting, particularly as a radio astronomer myself, to be able to write about, you know, this pioneering instrument and the incredible science that it was doing and discoveries that it was making. And that will remain in our collection for future generations to understand and wonder at. The last part of my job, and I'm sure most curators would agree that this is the most fun, most exciting part of what we do, is developing exhibitions. So on the left was my first exhibition, which I co-curated with 2 other curators, Experimentations, a children's science gallery. It's very hands-on, lots of interactive activities. And then in 2019, the Apollo 11 exhibition celebrating the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. And I think what I really love about this work is obviously being able to communicate these ideas to whoever the audience is intended to be, but also figuring out what should go on display. That's really your job as the curator. Is, you know, you're in charge of every aspect of the content. So what objects you put on display, what images and animations and film and all kinds of other things might support that material, writing the text information that goes into the exhibition. And you work with a fantastic team of designers and graphic designers, editors. It amazes me now that I wrote an entire thesis without the help of an editor. That seems insane to me. Thanks. And you know, so everyone from those guys to the workshop who like hands-on build the exhibition components, it's really a lot of fun. So hopefully that gives you kind of some idea of how, I guess, my experience as an astronomer and as a scientist has fed into my work now. Those were a couple of projects that you just saw that I did during my first job as an assistant curator. So this was really coming in on the lowest level. I did get to have quite a bit of direction with some projects. There were others where I was really just kind of, you know, the nobody behind the scenes doing a lot of the uninspiring grunt work, but I still really enjoyed it and getting to know the collection, and that's really the way in. These are some photos of things in action, and I think if I could give any advice, like when I looked back at my photos from those 3 years, I was like, God, I did a lot, because I was new and I had to prove myself, and I put my hand up for everything that I possibly could, including things I had no idea about, and kind of figured out my way through that. That then led to a promotion, but also kind of a sideways step away from science for a couple of years, working on the museum's collection digitization project. I basically, you know, to be honest, I really took that opportunity because it was the only way that I could see of moving up in the organization of that time. But fortunately, I'm now back working on the science curators team, which I'm very excited about. So I'm only 4 weeks into this role and still, you know, figuring out the direction of things, but working again with our space and astronomy collection, expanding out into transport collection as well, and really thinking towards what we want to do with the new site at Parramatta and the exhibitions that we might put on there. So yeah, I'll finish there, and happy to answer any questions during the Q&A time.
Oh, thank you so much. Your job sounds so awesome. It sounds way better than yelling at a computer all day, which is what I do.
Yeah, I won't lie. It's a lot of fun. I love it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, Bonnie, it's your turn.
Okay, I also have slides, so I'm going to share them. That's not at all what I want to do, slideshow. Okay, cool. So yeah, thanks very much for having me. Thanks Henry and the ECR chapter for the invite. It's been so interesting to hear the other stories I've heard today about other career trajectories, and I hope to be able to add one more data point that's may or may not be useful. So who am I? Currently my job title is I'm a security engineer at Google in Australia. I've also been a software engineer and a software engineer in site reliability, so an SRE. In astronomy, so I'm about 3 and a bit years post PhD now. My astronomy work was in supernova cosmology in Brian Schmidt's group at the ANU. My work was in working out the Hubble constant from supernova calibrated by Cephids. I was also involved in the Dark Energy Survey and the Australian spectroscopic counterpart of that, ASA. I was also in Castro, so I'm getting severe Castro nostalgia just being here today. Here's a bit of a timeline of what I did. It's also in the CV I uploaded, if you were in the CV section. I won't go over a lot of detail, but basically I did both my undergrad and PhD at the ANU. My undergrad was in a variety of things like physics, astronomy, pure maths. I did honours in pure maths. I kind of took a year off to work out what next steps were, did a lot of physics Olympiad work, some other travelling, and then lined up the PhD position. I worked for the physics Olympiad for about 8 years in total. So from when I was a first year in uni until about the 3rd year when I decided I couldn't cope with the sleep debt anymore and to spend more time actually writing a thesis. And I mention it because it was such an important part of my professional life. I think like just the skills I've learned in communicating, leadership, running, making things run have been so valuable. And in about the 4th year of my PhD, I transitioned part-time to a software engineering position in a Canberra startup. And then a few years later, landed at Google. So I'll talk a bit more about how that process went. Before I do that, I'll give some caveats. I know basically nothing about professional data science or machine learning. I can do basic like manipulating of large cosmology data sets, and that's about it. I will also preface this with a retrofitted idea of how I've made decisions in past 10 or 15 years. And this is not at all advice. It's more context as to why I've done things the way I have. So I've tended to seek out opportunities for things that interested me or excited me at the time, and then taken them if they were available, which is how I've ended up going from maths to astro and now to security. And the corollary of that is I will just regret. I believe that I'll regret not doing things more than I'll regret doing things. In other words, take the leap, take the risk. And from an outside perspective, I've never really had a 3 to 5 year plan besides being enrolled in the degree, and this may look somewhat impulsive. but I've also tried to finish what I started within reason. And I will also acknowledge the privilege I've had and the places where I've gotten lucky to get where I am. And part of that is I can do okay at things like coding interviews if I study, if I am prepared for things like technical problem solving. I can generally do well under pressure, which has helped a lot with getting to Google. I think having Physics Olympiad on my resume is also I don't know if that's actually the case, but it feels like it's been a shortcut to people sort of assuming that I know what I'm doing. And I've also really benefited from just knowing from knowing someone in the first startup I landed in, while they didn't interview me formally because it's a conflict of interest because they were my friend, they were able just to say, yes, I know this person, they're competent, give them a chance. And I think getting my foot in the door there made all the difference. So the process of how this went was mostly in the fourth year of my PhD. I would say towards the end of my third year, at the start of the fourth year, I was about 50-50 with regard to staying or going. And one of the tipping points was at a panel like this where someone said, if you're thinking about leaving, and I know this is opposite to what Jose said, but if you're thinking about leaving, then you're better off doing this earlier than later, because those extra years of experience in the industry are going to be worth so much more to your career than another postdoc or two. So at that point, I was like, okay, I'll do somewhere between 0 or 2 postdocs, maybe get to live somewhere cool, and then look for an industry job. That all kind of fell into place in about the fourth year. And I would say nothing really bad happened, but the primary motivation for getting out was realizing that I enjoyed solving problems with code. I like writing code. I like doing analytical things and solving problems. And the content mattered less. And while astronomy was really cool and I enjoyed it, I wasn't willing to sacrifice everything else for it. So around that time, maybe at the 3.5 year mark, coinciding with running out of scholarship, I reached out to a startup, Quintessence Labs in Canberra, that they spawned out of the ANU physics department and focused on using quantum physics and technology for cybersecurity. And they weren't really taking part-timers, but I reached out, and it was actually Lisa Hampton at ANU who gave me this idea that you could just start part-time work while finishing a PhD. But I had that in mind. I reached out and said, I know you don't like part-timers, but can I just do this while finishing my PhD and then go full-time? And so I ended up doing 2 days a week for about 10 months, and then went full-time about a month or 2 before I submitted, which was not a fun time, and then graduated a few months after that. And then about 2 years in, I got contacted by a recruiter just on LinkedIn saying, do you want to apply for Google? As with the first interview, I wasn't sure how it'd go, but I thought it'd be a good experience. And if anything, I'll gain some experience from going through the interview process. And at the time, I wasn't really taking that seriously. I didn't want to live in Sydney, which was the only option at the time. So I got through the first interview. I took a few months before the next year because I wanted to take time to study and I wasn't in a hurry. I got through the next year and then started about almost 2 years now. And I want to point out that that delay was entirely on my part. You can get through the interview process a lot quicker if you want to. I just wasn't in a hurry to move. I interviewed as a software engineer, which is called a SWE in Google. It sounds funny, but I'm used to it by now. I took a site reliability engineer position because it sounded interesting. It was one of the options that the hiring manager offered. I thought it sounded really cool. So it's about half operations, half engineering, and it's more focused on keeping a site up and running rather than just building the products. And in the past couple of months, I had the opportunity to do a rotation as a security engineer because I found information security really interesting and wanted to do it and just had the opportunity to. And so that's where I am now, and I'm really enjoying it. Some differences I'll point out for what my experience of industry or tech jobs are like compared to academia. Early in my PhD, okay, thanks. Early in my PhD, one of the postdocs in the group was saying, that you can't work in postdoc level positions forever. At some point, you need to be on a 10-year track, become a professor. Even if you are happy to be a postdoc, you can't, they just run out. That's not true, at least at Google. If you want to plateau at some, not immediately entry level, but a bit above that, and if that's what makes you happy, you don't have to keep getting promoted, you can just stay there. There's a difference in job and financial security. Jobs are permanent by default instead of a contract, and the money varies, but it can be pretty good. So you just have the ability to plan for a few more years than going from postdoc to postdoc. In my experience, I find that my identity is less coupled to the research I do. So I feel like in astronomy you have a quite strong tie to the work you do, like that's who you are. And I feel like that's not the case in industry. You just turn up, you do your good work, but who you are is outside of that. Your mileage may vary, and the flip side is I've heard some people who have an identity as a physicist or astronomer and then go through a loss of that when they leave. And as I pointed out, as I alluded to earlier, I've had quite a lot of flexibility in where I wanted to go career-wise, and that I wanted to be in security, and I just had the opportunity to go there. The takeaways I'll leave are what I said earlier about leaving early once you're committed to leaving. There's people who I work with who I went to school with 10 years earlier who are like miles more senior than me, because I didn't do a computer science degree, and I am still fairly entry level, relatively speaking. On compensation or remuneration, don't accept the first offer, no matter how good it looks. A corollary of that is you don't want to anchor on academic numbers in your CV. So I think I called out a few people in the CV reviews. There's lots of resources on what to expect. I think there's a lot more openness about salary as well. So I'm happy to talk about this anytime. And the other thing is networking is so important. There's so many astronomers who have moved to industry jobs. We're generally all really happy to talk. And the flip side of this as well is at a lot of companies, you get referral bonuses. So it's people are motivated to help you get in the door, because if you get hired, and they get more money. And yeah, it's so worthwhile just talking to people you knew, whether from professional events, school, people you met at a barbecue. That's really helped me, and I think it does make a difference. So that's all I have, and I'm looking forward to hopefully fielding some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Bonnie. That was a really interesting point you made about how in academia you can't really just get to postdoc level and say like, I want to stay here for the rest of my career. Yeah, I never really thought about that before, but that's a really good point to make. Yeah, I'd like to give another thanks to all of our wonderful panelists. It's so great to hear such a wide variety of different opinions and career trajectories, and I'm sure everyone will love to hear what you have to say in our Q&A session, which is starting now. So just before we start, because there are 5 of you, in the interest of time, I'll try to address questions to specific panelists. But if any of you has like a burning comment or anything you want to add, feel free to interject or jump in. So do we have any questions in the audience? Feel free to use the raise hand option. I can't see any yet. So in the, oh, there we go.
Yep.
Zishan says, the question for Jose, as an international student or postdoc, when you looked for a job in Australia, did you meet any difficulties?
Well, that's an interesting one. I think in the States it was harder, and I think in Australia it was easier. You do need to try to sort of play a little bit on the alongside the culture of the country that you're in, such that you just kind of make it easy to fit. And by fit, I mean just to add value, right? To demonstrate as quick as you can that you are going to be, a team player and going to be part of it. But I think when I look at my team, I have 6 people on my team, and one of them is Chinese, one of them is Indian, one of them is Iranian, one of them is British, one of them is Australian, and somebody else that I forgot of. So it's Australia is wonderful because of that. I think in essence, I would say it's a great place to be an international.
Cool, thanks. So I have a question from Jessica. Bonnie, how did you find finishing your PhD part-time while working part-time?
Yeah, that's a good question. For the most part, I didn't really mind it because I was mostly writing at that point, and it meant I could compartmentalize. And what I mean by that is there were 2 days of my work week where I wasn't entirely miserable, and for the rest of it, I could just try and write at home, work in a cafe, go up to Stromlo. It was hard, but it helped, I think, having something else and also having that separation from my week by context as well.
If I may just add to that a little bit, sorry. I also went through that process, is that, you know, I worked 3 days and then worked on PhD 3 days, and I deliberately made sure there was one day I wasn't doing anything that's brain intensive because I tried it previously. I worked 5 days and 2 days PhD. That burnt me out in 3 months. So I said, no, Matthew, this is what I'm going to do. 3 and 3 plus 1 for myself. I'm going to do other things.
Yeah, very, very sensible not to be working every single day of the week. I'm glad it worked out in the end. We have a question from Julian. So for Dilyar or Julie, how important is a GitHub/lab, etc. portfolio for applications to data science positions? Is it a bonus or is it essential?
I'll start and then Dilyar can add at the end. So when I tried to leave government to go into industry, every place that I went to apply for always asked for a link to my GitHub page or to my Bitbucket page, and I never had one. I still don't have one. And so I saw it as essential. But I'm lucky enough to work in government where they just, it's sort of networking at the moment.
To add on to that, you know, when I hired people, for example, I recently hired a couple of software engineers, as well as reviewed a bunch of interns for a data science position. And what I'm finding is that those who have a portfolio, usually the task that they do and the experience that they have is sometimes clearly different than those who don't have a portfolio at all. So I would say, you know, during a spare time, definitely pad up your GitHub portfolio if you don't have one. If you can't think of anything to put in there, I would say any tool that you currently use, and that's another good thing about academia, is that a lot of the softwares that you guys build, the programs that you guys build, they're not proprietary and they can be public so that you can actually show that. Otherwise, there are also a lot of data science projects that you guys can just do on the side. They are designed to be kind of like a portfolio padding. Even those are still valuable because it shows to the recruiter and those who are hiring you that you have actually done something, you have built something, you have experience of shipping it off to people other than you using it. That's also very important because the thing, what I realized myself is that while during my PhD, I built a lot of stuff. Yes, I built the data reduction pipeline for Taipan, but no one else was using it at the time. And when I realized that, I said, okay, you know what? Anything that I'm going to build now, I'm going to build with the purpose of that this is going to serve someone else. When you have that mentality, that means your code is actually going to be somewhat production level as opposed to just something that you scrap together. And that actually shows. So yeah, there are a lot of Python projects. You can just slap it on there and you have a portfolio. It doesn't take that long either.
Cool, thanks. Well, I know what I'll be doing Friday afternoon. Sarah, I think I might throw this one your way. So Andrew asks, as someone who was just 6 months into his PhD but already knows he doesn't want to work in academia, what would you recommend I do as I go along, as I'm trying not to get caught up in becoming very specifically skilled? Is there something I could or should be learning on the side?
Yeah, I'm really glad you threw this one over to me, because I am going to put in a plug for doing some outreach type activities. These guys can all, I think, give you a lot of really great practical advice if you're looking to go down a data science route, or, you know, industry contacts, that kind of thing. But to actually get the practice of being able to talk about a topic that's really highly specialized, that you know really well, but for a general audience, someone who might never have done any astronomy and literally doesn't know the difference between, you know, a star and a planet and a moon, that kind of thing is really important, and that is often the level that you're dealing with, and that's just, you know, a fact of people not having been immersed in it in the same way as we are. And you know, and I'm just going to say, all of astronomy is actually publicly funded, and I actually think that we all have an obligation, if we want it to continue to be funded into the future, to do that. But yeah, that would be one part of the advice that I would give.
That's a really good point about astronomy being publicly funded. It's, yeah, definitely not the case in a lot of other fields. Thanks. Let's see. Anshu asks, Julie, you mentioned that being on maternity leave helped you when you decided to move to industry. How was that?
Yes, so I had 3 kids, so I was on maternity leave 3 times. And each time I stepped away and I put all of my research on hold, and, you know, nobody picked it up and took it from me. So it just sat there for months. And so during that time, my brain just sort of wandered, and you're able to do other things. And so it helped me sort of research what else was available, sort of find out about, you know, adding a LinkedIn profile and maybe upskilling in some things. So it provided that opportunity for me to sort of branch out and look at other opportunities that are out there. So that's what I used my maternity leave for. But I guess maybe subconsciously I knew I was going to leave academia when I had the first kid as opposed to the 3rd kid. But yeah.
Cool, thanks for that. Julio, I believe that's your name. So I think I might throw this one to Jose. Did income play much or any part of your decision for leaving academia? It's quite disheartening looking at overseas postdoc pay, which doesn't have much room for growth until or if you can score a permanent position, which could be many years.
Yes, unfortunately, it does play a role. And it does play a role when you want to have a more standard life, right? And you look at your friends that are your age, and you see what they're earning and the things that they can do, right? So on the one hand, you have, you know, astronomy. Nothing beats astronomy. I like that better than any job that I've ever had. But on the other hand, like, if you want to buy things, or if you want to live in the same place, or if you want to pay a car or something like that, it did play a role, and it is a big jump. Yeah, just to put it kind of completely raw. It would be one of those things that you would want to keep talent in astronomy with, like, could you have higher salaries? But on the other side, it's not easy because it's publicly funded, as it was perfectly said, and it's also a bit of a dream job as well, right? You don't do it for money. So I wouldn't say that the solution is just to throw money at astronomers. It's just part of the choice.
Yeah, a bit of a sad reality there, unfortunately. So Julian has a follow-up question to the previous question about Git. Is a LinkedIn profile important to nurture/develop before you get an industry position? Or is it something that you should start building after you've gotten your first real job? I think I might throw this one to Bonnie.
I didn't make a LinkedIn until I was in my first industry job, so I can't really say. I suspect you'll get a lot more attention and people reaching out once you're already in an industry position. But it certainly helped me. I don't know, can someone else provide any input?
I'm happy to add on to that. Yeah, like Bonnie, I started my LinkedIn profile after I moved out of academia. And also, it's not something that you really need to build as such. It's something that just, you have a profile, you leave it out there. It's like Google Plus to us, right? We all had that once upon a time and we left it there. every now and then I go back to it and update it. And a heads up is that depends on who you follow on LinkedIn. It's just like any other social media. You'll see all sorts of different mindsets and possibilities and connections. And you do actually get, I'm just going to make some assumptions with the crowds here that you're going to get a lot of people reaching out to you. Every now and then I'll have recruiters reaching out to me and say, hey, are you interested in this position? Are you interested in that position? Looking at my history. And there are a lot of talent scouts there. So it can just be a funnel that you can put out there. It doesn't really have to consume you in any way. You just have it out there. Every now and then you'll get a message, and that's about it.
Yeah, I have a LinkedIn as well, and I also find that I occasionally get a random message from a recruiter asking me if I'm interested in some Python job somewhere.
Yep.
So yeah, you do get people talking to you if you have one, even if you don't really use it that often. I have a question for Sarah. So your current job is like, safe to say, really different from what the average astronomy postdoc does. Do you ever find that you miss like the really hardcore like coding and technical like computing kind of aspects?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I miss, and the coding is definitely one part of that. One of my biggest achievements is finding a genuine reason to need to get Python installed on my work laptop. It took me like 4.5 years to find a reason for that, but I got there in the end and very happy. Yeah, I do miss that, but I think for me, and the other thing that I really miss is like being able to, not that anyone's been traveling much the last couple of years, but being able to travel to work with colleagues, travel to conferences. There's very little budget, at least within my organization, for that kind of thing. But for me, it is far, far outweighed by, I just feel so much happier in my work and in my life, have much better work-life balance. I think the imposter syndrome of astronomy is no longer like gnawing away at me constantly. I feel like I'm doing something that I'm good at, and I'm contributing something, and I can see directly through the work that I produce how I'm contributing. So yes, there are bits that I miss, but I would say I would do it again in a heartbeat, and I love what I do.
That's good to hear. Do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, I have a few more questions. Bonnie, I've got a question for you. So transitioning into an industry career can feel like, jumping into the unknown, like you have no idea what's going to happen. Did you have any like fears or concerns about transitioning into industry that ended up just being completely unfounded? And our other panelists can also jump in if they have thoughts on this question too.
I think when you're in academia, you have an idea that. Can you hear me okay? My headphones.
Yep.
Okay, cool. You have the idea that everyone, just literally anyone, can like reduce data or write code in Python and enumerate, and that's just not true. And I think we spend a lot of time surrounded by really smart technical people. And you expect that that's the case outside. So you might underestimate your own competence. So I think that was something that was unfounded when I ended up in industry. But I didn't really have any sort of preformed fears because I was just trying to stay afloat, basically. So I was just taking it as it came.
Yeah, I found one mentality that really helped when I did the transition is that constantly reminding myself my entire research what it trained me to do is to figure things out. So I just kept telling myself, that's my profession, that's my skill set. I'm good at figuring things out. I know how to Google better than other people. And so that confidence essentially gave me a platform, a voice to say, okay, any field that I go into, I might not have previous experience, but I'm going to figure it out. And that's why, I started a startup. I've never had experience of doing a startup. So that means, okay, I have to be my own CTO. I have to be my own CFO. I have to be my own CIO. I have to be essentially see everything. Now, essentially, I'm in that position because I had to be. And that, that mentality was really helpful in that kind of transition, is that I might not have the experience, but I'm really good at figuring things out. And I think that is true for a lot of us here. The Python, the programming, the Fortran, the IDL you use is just tools. It's the mindset, the critical thinking skills that's actually very valuable and very much underrated in a lot of circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, completely agree with that. And I think that it follows a little bit on when I said, don't be afraid to wing it, right? I think we come from a environment and an education where you are pretty loath to say something rash and quick and stupid and not having thought out something very, very carefully. So you are someone who go home and think about it and rethink about it and Google it 3 times and then come up with something back to the table that is going to add, because that's what research is, right? You're trying to publish things that are new but correct. Completely different in the real world or in the industry where time actually matters when you don't have 5 years to do your PhD until it's perfect, until the stars align. You have to come up with something. So the enemy of good is trying to get it perfect. And I think we are trained that way. So we have to fight it a little bit harder.
Yeah, definitely something to be conscious of. Julie and Sarah, do you have anything to add to that point? Like, was there anything you were like concerned about before you made the jump into industry?
No, I echo what everybody else said. I had the same, like, oh, everybody knows how to code and all of that. And when really you look around, it's like, oh, wait. Or yes, I can figure this out. I might not have the skill set or I might not know R, but I can figure it out and it's fine. But yes, and time is money in industry. So you have to be ready to stand up and say something.
For me, I think it was what Bonnie said about the identity loss of leaving astronomy. That was the thing that I was the most worried about, was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be an astronomer anymore. And what does that mean? That's everything I worked towards for the last like 10 years. And maybe it's just the nature of where I work. But it's a very, very strong community there. So perhaps in one sense I've kind of jumped from one identity to another. But yeah, that turned out really not to be a concern for me at all, even though it was my biggest fear.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like I'm probably going to transition to industry at some point because a lot of people have to. And yeah, that's definitely something that I'm personally concerned about. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that, it's all turned out quite well for you. Yep.
I actually have a question. I actually got a question for Jose. So earlier you mentioned that, you worked at CBA for a little bit and then, for your personal value issues, you left that position. And one thing that reminded me of is that I realized when I came out of my PhD towards the end, I had no financial education at all. My value towards money, which is actually a big part of our lives outside of academia, was essentially very at its infancy stage. And I didn't have anything to think about money. And in academia, a lot of times that, we say we don't do this for the money, we don't do this for the money. And then we seems to completely forget about money. So, given your experience working at CBA, it's a financial sector, how did you juggle that, your personal value? And, let's be honest, a lot of the business that we go into is very capitalistic.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that?
That's a great point. And it is a good thing to always consider. I mean, none of us went into astronomy for the money. That's a given, right? That's not like a great investment if you see it that way. And to date, I still don't do things for the money. Like I could have taken jobs that keep going up and up and up and whatever and chase it. I'm always happy to know that the money is kind of taken care of. When it comes to and as I said, it is a factor and you don't want to be blind to it. Exactly like you said, we're blind on it in astronomy and maybe that's too blind to it. But also, for example, when it came to the work in CBA, I had only started, I had done a project, I was getting excited about it. And then I had a supervisor with a PhD in statistics from Oxford. So instantaneously you sort of correlate and you relate to them and you look up to them, right? And he came up and said, he was the head of data and analytics there. He's not there anymore, so I can talk about it. And he wanted me to make a model that would predict people that would be revolving on their credit card statement, not able to fully pay the sum in full, but also with a low likelihood that they would default, ergo costing money to the bank. And the goal was to suppress some reminder messages such that they wouldn't pay in full and they would keep revolving happily, like, i.e. not default. And I thought it was hideous. And I told them, like, supposedly CDA's motto is to protect and enhance the financial well-being of individuals and communities. I mean, to date, I still know it by heart. And I was like, this doesn't seem to do that, to line up that. And I said it quite, I was really coy and I was really scared and I was quite new. So I was still trying to please, right? Like you try to please your PhD advisor. And he just smiled at me and he said, fine, don't do it. And he turned around and grabbed an intern who came from actuarial studies, who had done his, a completely different line. And he just jumped at it and took it and did it. And I thought to myself, this is not going to be the place where I belong. Independently of whatever career is there. And the beauty is, I found out to wrap this answer is that you can still get a job that gives you a lot of money without having to do shit that makes you utterly uncomfortable. So the good lesson was I didn't do that thing, which was great, and I didn't even pay for it with money. I just went to Qantas, and it's just another company, right?
Yeah, I think that's really good. Thank you for that answer. Yeah, I think it's really good to actually remind ourselves that a lot of times we actually have options and choices. That's what one of the privileges that we're going to have by default by having a PhD is that if we don't actually like one place, we can move on to the next. Yeah.
That's right. And data science and the statistics that all of you guys know and the computing that it opens the world. Like it's everywhere. I mean, and it's not only the tech companies, it is just so much. And if you're willing to detach yourself a little bit from the very hard science technical component, you can learn how businesses work, and then you open even further up the tree, right? So the world is really your oyster. I think the education that you get through astronomy, it's priceless. And you yourself said it when you said, the CVs, some people are not selling what they actually know well. They're not translating it. I didn't do the CVs. I don't have the time for it right now. But when you said it, I was like, exactly what I would expect it to see on some of the young people's CVs is like very academically written. And you go, you just need to pitch it differently because you already have it. You've done the hard yards.
Yeah, that was a really interesting anecdote about the CBA. Like I'll cross that off the list of businesses that I'll apply for when I eventually leave academia. But yeah, I think
they piss me off to no end.
Yeah.
I'm happy to see the back of them.
Yeah, I think in astronomy we don't really talk about the ethics and morals of what we do very often. So yeah, it's definitely important to have these conversations. So thanks. Julie, I think I'll direct this one at you. And Bonnie, I think also you might have something to add. So astronomy tends to be very open when it comes to sharing code and sharing ideas, whereas in industry, this is often not the case. Did you find it difficult to adjust to working in a high security environment where you can't, just go home and, whinge to your partner or whatever about the annoying thing in your code today? Like, did you find that difficult?
Yeah, it was still a rather large learning curve was what I can and can't talk about. And so what happens is you get down this rabbit hole of just gossip of people. Oh, so-and-so did whatever. And you're just like, no, stop. I don't want to talk about people. I don't want to talk about work. And so the great thing about working behind the wall is that you just don't talk about work. So my work-life balance is amazing. I go to work, I come home from work, and that's it. I'm done. And then I do whatever I want on the weekend. So I go watch my kids swim. I go watch them play baseball. We go to the beach. We do whatever. And and then I start work Monday morning and behind the wall. And it's great because the school doesn't call me, calls my husband. My husband goes picks them up. I don't go pick them up. So they can't get in touch with me. It's lovely. It's great. But as for the code, it is actually really difficult because you can't share what you've done. And so the only people you can talk to are the people who are also behind the curtain, whatever you want to call it. And so that's a really big downside. And so it almost felt like you get stuck in that type of role. So once you go down that road, it's really hard to break out. And so I caution people if they do go down that road, just because if in 3 years' time you're like, oh, I'm out of this, well, that's 3 years of work experience that you can't talk about. I'm happy to have that conversation offline at a later time if people do choose to want to go down that road. But I'm still here doing data science and doing cool things. So we do get to do some pretty cool things. So.
Yeah, I think I'll echo what Julie has said about you can't take it with you. So it is a bit confronting to leave a place and then realize you just have no record of code you've written for the past 2.5 years, which is norm. In terms of being able to talk about it, I don't think it's really been an issue because it's just not that interesting to talk about, like the ways in which my code has gone wrong in a proprietary way. Like there's maybe like stupid errors where like I misnamed a variable, like I chmodded something that went funny, but like that kind of thing I can talk about. So in the complaining to my partner sense, it hasn't been an issue.
Yes, it's actually really good relationship-wise because you're not talking about work, right? You can actually talk about everything else, which is, I don't know, that's good.
That sounds pretty good, actually. So we've only got about 5 minutes left. There are no more questions from the audience, which I can't see any. So I think I'll open this up to everyone. Were there any skills that you developed when you're in academia that when you moved into an industry position, you thought, oh, I'm never going to use this skill ever again. This is only useful for my astronomy career, that down the line turned out to actually be really helpful?
My ability to do a PowerPoint, nice. Seems to everybody's like, wow, that was really good. And I'm like, what? It's just like normal, in astronomy, you put up really cool pictures, right? And so, whereas some of these talks you go to, you're like, oh my goodness, it's just pages upon pages of text. So that was pretty neat.
I will add to that. This isn't of the like I never thought I'd use it again kind of thing, but I was really quite amazed how many people I meet in the workplace who are just not comfortable with public speaking. Whereas like we did it, as a PhD student, you would have been giving conference presentations sometimes to hundreds of people. We don't tend to talk with notes. We have our slides, we can talk from them, and I still do that. But I'm amazed by people even in really senior positions who like have their piece of paper, word for word, their script of what they're going to say, and they read it. And it's like, but I've spoken to you in a conversation, you know what you're talking about, but they can't can't do that in a public speaking setting for whatever reason. So yeah, that's been, I didn't think that was an unusual skill that I had.
Yeah, I think same for me. It's the public speaking skills, the ability to just wing a presentation. This became very apparent to me when, as part of startup, one of the things you have to do is actually go out and talk to investors and try to raise fund for your startup so that you can actually do something. And my co-founders would actually write up palm cards and read them off them in front of all these people who actually have no expertise in anything that we do. So that's when I started to say, okay, I didn't know that was actually a skill that I trained and obtained, but there you go. So I just did my spiel in front of everyone, and then same with other showcases. So I recently did a Canberra Innovation Network showcase doing the pitch. So for when you are part of a startup, when you co-found something, when you found something, you do a lot of startup pitch. So 2-minute pitches, elevator pitches. You have to become very good at it. And I just found out that my PhD has prepared me really well for that. So from now on, essentially all my co-founders, whenever we have something that we have to pitch for, they ask me to do it. But I must acknowledge that I'm generally very outgoing and talkative. I'm pretty extroverted in that regards, but I also practiced it a lot.
That's a really good point. And a lot of people coming from science are generally not that extroverted, much more introverted, and they might be very good at a long presentation where they'll explain things beautifully, but elevator pitch is a completely different skill, right? So ask yourself, how is your elevator pitching skills there? How quickly can you get to the point, right? A little bit when I said, out of the 5 or 6 or 7 things you want to explain that you're really proud of what you did, what is the one thing that people really need? That's what you mean with the elevator pitch, right? Really go at that, leave the details aside. And that was one thing I wasn't very good at. I was good at the big picture, but I was not good at a good quick elevator pitch and a good kind of assertive recommendation. So those things I had to learn on the job, right? Whereas it seems like you learned that in your PhD, as you said.
A lot of poster talks.
For example.
I was never good enough to actually give proper talks, but I gave a lot of poster talks. So that paid off.
Bonnie, is there anything you'd like to finish us off with there?
There were a couple of things other people mentioned. I think the one I agree with most is the public speaking. Otherwise, just analysing and maybe presenting data. That's something astronomers can all do, but is kind of underrated in the outside world, or overrated, I guess.
Yeah, I want to add to that as one of the things in part of my job is to review documents or review applications. So like there's the Defense Innovation Hub, for example, and companies will pitch ideas that might be related to defense. And the ability that we have from writing our own journals or being a referee to journals to be able to read and grasp when somebody's just throwing machine learning in because it's the new cool sexy thing to do versus somebody who understands and really what the goal of the project is. And I think that's a skill that you develop throughout doing your PhD and then into your postdoc that's really applicable that I'd never really thought would be.
Yeah, some really good points there. Cool. Well, we've hit 3:30, so I think we can probably wrap up there. I'd like everyone to give a brief round of applause for all of our amazing panelists today. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I personally have learned so much from all of your experiences and yeah, some great answers in the Q&A session. So this session has been recorded and we will hopefully chuck it on YouTube and send the link around to all the ASA members for your future reference. So our next session will be next Wednesday and it will be later in the day. I think it's starting at 4. I believe that's right. Anshu, is that right? Yep, cool. Yep, it's at 4. All right. Okay, well, I think that's about it. Thanks everyone again for coming and sharing your wisdom, and maybe we'll see you next week.